I appreciate the chance to be able to ask a few questions. Director Wray, I begin by saying how much I appreciate the work of your agents and how much I respect them and how convinced I am of their quality. One of my sons years ago interviewed to become a member of the FBI. He was turned down. He was able to go on and get a degree at Harvard Business School and has done quite well, so he survived. But we learned from that experience that the qualifications for getting into the FBI are high indeed, as they should be. And I have great respect for the men and women who work for the FBI. There is a great deal of discussion about the political orientation of the FBI. My experience with your organization is that is not the case by and large. I'm sure there are individuals among the 38,000 who work with you who have political points of view, may leak things and may do things from time to time that are not appropriate, and I hope that you're able to evaluate them and evaluate where those come from and correct them. Can you give us a sense of how the resources of the FBI are directed? How much goes into looking at violent crimes of various kinds and human trafficking? How much goes into terrorist-related prevention? The kinds of, if you will, are there categories of effort that are carried out? Because I think there's a public perception that the whole FBI, we had to defund it because it's only doing political work. What is the FBI doing? Where are the resources devoted?
So if you were to look at our allocation of resources, and I can't give you the numbers off the top of my head, but if you were to look at the allocation of our resources, you would see that the single largest chunk is devoted to traditional criminal programs, and of which the violent crime is by far and away the biggest. And we have safe streets task forces all over the country. We have transnational organized crime task forces all over the country. We have violent crimes against children task forces. So those remain our bread and butter. Those remain our biggest programs. We do have unique responsibility for national security threats as well. And so if you were to look at our strategy, you might see the national security threats listed first, because those are places where if we don't do it, no one will, right? Whereas violent crime, crimes against children, we work much more shoulder to shoulder with our state and local law enforcement partners. So a lot of times those national security threats, terrorism, counterintelligence work, cybercrime, get most of to Senator Scott's point, the media attention. But day in, day out, the FBI that most Americans and certainly most law enforcement professionals and I talk to chiefs and sheriffs every week, the FBI they experience most is really more focused on the traditional criminal stuff.
Yeah, thank you. You've spoken a great deal about the cyber attacks from state actors from China as well as non-state actors. Secretary Mayorkas has spoken about that as well. I don't know that it's possible to, through a process of defending against attacks, to prevent all the potential attacks and all the theft that will come from our businesses and into our government. It strikes me that the only effective way to stop the attacks that come from of a cyber nature is to attack back, that the best defense is a good offense. And I know your respective organizations are not responsible for the offensive side of this, but to get China to stop attacking, they've got all these private enterprises that are doing these attacks into our systems. Fighting against all these things will never stop it unless China recognizes that if they don't stop it, that they're going to be hurt more than we are. Do you believe we have a sufficient effort in an offensive effort to push back against the cyber attacks that come from state and non-state actors, and should we expand on that, and where should that reside? And I'll ask both Director Wray as well as Secretary Mayorkas and Director Abizad to respond.
So certainly when it comes to offense is a critical part of our overall effort to push back against cyber adversaries. In addition to some of the offensive cyber operations that we probably couldn't talk about in this kind of setting, there's actually a lot of progress being made in what I obliquely referred to earlier as joint sequenced operations, where we, with our partners, intelligence community partners, law enforcement partners, foreign partners, go with the whole 2 + 2 to make 5 kind of effect. So we're going after the adversary's infrastructure, we're going after their cryptocurrency, we're going after the individual actors. Some of them we can extradite, some of them we can have charged there. We're engaging in other sort of more sensitive counterintelligence type work to amplify those effects. But what we have found is that when we go after the actors, the infrastructure, and the money all simultaneously, we can degrade and disrupt their effectiveness. It is, I think, that is really ultimately the real goal, is to degrade, disrupt, and defend in that way. In some ways, the deterrence model is harder. Much the same way, we're not going to deter the Chinese or the Russians from spying, but we can make it hellishly difficult for them to do it. And that's what we're after now, is imposing risks and consequences on the adversaries to hit them where it hurts, to make it harder and harder for them to really come after us with cyber means.
Thank you.
If I may, Senator, add a point, because of course I don't need to speak of the criticality of a strong defense, and you are of course focused on, offensive behavior. A few weeks ago, I was in Singapore to speak to our allies in the Indo-Pacific region about the importance, or I should say, the peril of having China own or operate other nations' critical infrastructure, and the perils it presents from a cybersecurity and other security perspectives. And it was a very important dialogue, not only with our Singaporean partners, our Japanese partners, but other countries in the region, because China is very aggressive in seeking to own or operate the infrastructure in telecommunications and other technologies.
Yeah. Thank you. Director, yes.
Senator, I would just say, I'll defer to my colleagues on the cyber-specific piece of your question, but what I would say from a counterterrorism community perspective, there's so much that we have learned as a collaborative community about both offense and defense at the same time, that those lessons learned applied to things like transnational organized crime or cyber threats, I think really position us well as a government to take it to the threat actors.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Romney. Senator